Hello everyone, KTChamberlain here. After 16 years of work, the first book in my sci-fi series has finally gotten past editing and is now in the proofreading stage before it finds its way into print. In the meantime, I figured I'd do a series of videos talking about my literary influences, whose writings have been very influential to me in the making of this series and why I hold them in such high regard. With all that said, let's begin with the one who's been an influence to many a best-selling author, from Tad Williams to J.R.R. Martin to Christopher Paolini, John Ronald Reuel Tolkien, aka J.R.R. Tolkien. 20 years ago, when I was 12 years old, my mother took me to see The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring. At first, I thought it wouldn't outdo Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, having seen it the month before. But by the end of that film, I was wrong and immediately fell in love with the world of Middle-earth. It may have ended on a bittersweet note, but I still looked forward to seeing how the story would continue and unfold. This was made even better by the fact that each movie was released 1 year apart instead of 3 years. 2002 came along and my mom took me to see The Two Towers. I was getting over pneumonia at the time, but that didn't stop me from powering through and suppressing my coughs as much as possible, and the movie was still a great experience. 2003, my mom took me to see The Return of the King, and it was a great movie-going experience. In Christmas of 2002, 2003, and 2004, my uncle got the extended editions of the trilogy. Through those movie box sets, I watched the supplementary material on Tolkien himself and was fascinated by how this Oxford Don, who survived World War I, was able to create one of the greatest fantasy epics of our time. At 15, I decided to read The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, and I loved both the books and the movies. By the time I finished The Lord of the Rings, I realized that I wanted to be a creative writer and create a story with depth. This would not have been possible had I not seen the movies when I did, which opened the door to the books, so in that regard, I want to thank my mom and my uncle for making that possible. Anyway, part of what I like about Tolkien is that reading his works, especially in my experience, can make you a better observer, like a bird watcher. To create a convincing story, you gotta know what you're talking about in every detail, and if you were to tell that story, you gotta be very observant. In addition to creating a convincing story, you gotta know how to sell it to your readers, and as early as Christmas of 1920, Tolkien began a series of letters written in shaky handwriting to his children addressed from Father Christmas. He would bribe the postman to deliver these letters in the post because, well, they did not have actual stamps. But to Tolkien's children, they were quite convinced that they came from the North Pole itself and not from their father's hand. These letters and the artwork accompanied often told parts of a story with some funny little anecdotes. Even when John and Michael Tolkien heard their father accidentally give himself away in dropping off a letter by stubbing his toe saying "blast," they didn't let on for a very long time. Since Tolkien held on to every letter, every artwork, his son Christopher Tolkien and his wife Bailey compiled them together into Letters from Father Christmas after Tolkien's death in 1973. Speaking of Letters from Father Christmas, Tolkien was also a talented artist, and not only did he illustrate The Hobbit, but he also did the cover art for said book and its sequel, The Lord of the Rings. I have a huge respect for authors who also illustrate their own books. This is partly why I love artists like Akira Toriyama, Rumiko Takahashi, Hiromu Arakawa, Taika Kubo, and Brian Lee O'Malley. I too have drawn the cover art for my book, and I've illustrated it too. But the one thing I really envy Tolkien is how he could create and flesh out languages. He had such a remarkable gift for languages ever since childhood. In one such instance, he said, quote, "a green great dragon," to which his mother tried to correct him saying, "You mean a great green dragon." But Tolkien confirmed that there's nothing in the English language that says it has to be the way his mother said. His argument was that when you put the word great before the color, it unintentionally suggests that it's the color that's great, not the creature in question. Tolkien really chose his words wisely, because he understood that one poorly phrased word could work against him. I've learned to do the same. For example, when people were calling this pandemic the new normal, I was saying, no, the word you're looking for is abnormal because there's nothing normal about this to begin with. I forget exactly how many languages and dialects he created in Middle-earth, but what I do know is that he created at least 2 types of Elvish, Quenya and Sindarin, 2 types of Black speech, the language of Mordor, and at least 2 types of Dwarvish. I could go on. I mean, I wish I could create languages like that. Tolkien himself said that he had been creating languages since he was 14 and never really stopped. He was a professor of Anglo-Saxon and even based the Rohirrim's language off of Old English. For Tolkien, he starts with a name and then creates a story around it in terms of its meaning.
I always, in writing, always start with a name. Give me a name and it produces a story, not the other way about, normally.
While I may not have the same approach per se, I've always had a knack for wordplay, especially in coming up with nicknames. Give me a name or tell me something about the person or animal in question, and I can come up with a clever nickname or two. For example, I had a job where I worked with horses, and I often came up with nicknames for the horses. We had this white horse with a gray mane and tail named Toby, and the best nickname I had for him was Gandalf, because he's gray and white, and it just so happened that Gandalf's favorite pipe weed to smoke is called Old Toby. So that'll be another nickname for that horse when he gets old. Funny how it works. Speaking of horses, Tolkien did have a good understanding of these animals because just before World War I, he was part of something called King Edward's Horse, where his job was to break in the horses for the officers. Remember, World War I was the last war where men rode out on horses, so when Tolkien wrote about horses like Shadowfax, Brago, Bill the Pony, or the horses that the Rohirrim ride, it shows that he really appreciated them. My sentiments exactly. They're such smart animals, and they too helped in my creativity. Tolkien's world building is very marvelous, and the themes in Tolkien's works are so numerous that I could do a whole string of videos on the themes alone. Side note, if you want me to cover the themes in Tolkien, please let me know in the comments of this video. For example, the most obvious themes in his works are how industry attacks nature, how greed can imprison us all, how sometimes simplicity is best, and how you can be right but for the wrong reasons. There are a ton more that are present, like unity versus uniformity, how refusing to accept change can lead to worse changes. I could go on, but you get my point. Part of what also makes a great story is not taking the easy routes. People appreciate boldness. John F. Kennedy famously said, "We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard." That alone inspired far more confidence in the American people than if he had taken the safest choice of words. And Tolkien must have had a similar understanding, especially in his storytelling, because often in life, very few choices are simple. In The Lord of the Rings, there's the line, "The hasty stroke oft goes astray." In modern terms, we understand that as "don't go off half-cocked," or "don't jump the gun." Tolkien had quite an attention to detail and would often rewrite passages in the 15 years he had spent writing Lord of the Rings. One notable example was that he originally wrote that the Fellowship of the Ring had arrived at the doors of Durin a day early and said that the full moon was present. However, Tolkien realized that in accordance to the lunar phases of that month and year, he was one day too early, so he had to rewrite it so that they would arrive on the proper night of a full moon. One person in 1,000 might have spotted that, but Tolkien would never let such a faux pas slide. If he did, internet critics would never let him live that one down. In a way, Tolkien predicted the internet decades before its inception. Side note, I too had a similar rewrite in my series that involved the moon and what phase it would be in the timeline, and having to revise it to the correct phase. Bottom line, Tolkien was an author who really did his homework and did so passionately. Tolkien held true to his values, especially his faith in God via his core Catholic values. When his mother converted Catholic in his early childhood, it alienated her from her family. When she died when Tolkien was 12, he really remained a devout Catholic to the day he died. He felt like she died for the faith and stuck to his guns. While I do at times feel that Tolkien was conservative to a fault, not in any political sense, mind you, I do at least respect him for being true to himself and not BSing himself, especially after how traumatized he was in World War I. While there is an element of escapism in his works, they are not escapist in the fullest sense of the word, and they don't shy away from heavy subjects and mature themes. With Tolkien, what you see is what you get, and it's part of his genius that he did not write an allegory in his works, but rather wrote something with applicability. And in that applicability is a timelessness where each new generation can find new meanings in them. All in all, people have their reasons why they hold Tolkien in high regard, and now you've heard mine. And that is why J.R.R. Tolkien is one of my literary influences. This is KTChamberlain. Thank you for watching.